press record there. This talk is going to be recorded. You can't be seen, the public cannot be seen, and you cannot be heard. So your mute buttons are all on, and so you don't have to worry. It's just myself and Melinda that will be seen on screen. And the Q&A, as I said, is anonymous as well. It won't be seen by anybody else in the crowd, only but read by me. It's the chat that will be public. So without any more further ado, I hand you over to Melinda, and thank you, Melinda, for joining us this morning and contributing to this.
Thanks, Jackie. So I suppose, you know, my credentials of 30 years of experience working in this field is you know, well, probably frightening for me to think how old you get while you're still here. I suppose also I am a parent. I've worked supporting parents. I think one of the things that occurred to me at some stage, somebody asked me, well, you supported parents before you became one. What was the difference? And I think one of the big differences for me was to discover that actually it was a lot harder to do it than it was to talk about it. And so I give that as a sort of proviso this morning, that actually dealing with anxiety in children is in some ways we can talk about it and we can work out plans, but everybody is individual. And it's a lot harder to do this than it is to talk about it. And my first advice is that we need to slow down and we need to listen. When I became a parent myself, I was really surprised by my own expectations of myself, but also of my children. I have twins, and one of them was often anxious. Everything seemed too big for him until he had done it. He was a good football player, but he hated getting out of the car at training. Sometimes he'd refuse when we arrived, things like birthday parties. He often hated things like that because they felt too unstructured for him. He didn't like if he couldn't see who was in charge. So you had to sort of introduce him to the mom or the dad and say, this is the person in charge of you for the time. So anything that was unpredictable for him felt like a challenge. He would he would have things like a pain in his tummy, and there's a temptation to think that that pain isn't real, but I think that pain is real. He found it hard to talk to people if he was feeling nervous. Actually, preparing for a talk on anxiety this morning, I found myself getting a little bit nervous. You know, so every time we go to do something new, we have this feeling again. And it's a feeling that we're probably all familiar with if we let ourselves think about it too much. He was the most likely to say, he was most likely to have sort of negative self-talk, you know, I can't do this, and he'd have to be cajoled. So things like homework, if something was tricky for him, he sort of didn't want to do it, you know, because sort of to put himself out there and try and fail was very scary for him. We used to say he was a little like Eeyore. He sort of had a, you know, the cup is half empty attitude to life, you know. So what did he need? He needed a lot of reassurance. Any irritation on our part. So sometimes, you know, as a parent, you're busy and it's like you feel like you don't have the time to give the additional layer of reassurance. Another time was saying, it'll be okay, you'll be fine, this is what we're going to do. And we sort of, our busy lives get in the way sometimes of us doing that. But that irritation always seemed to set him back. So he always sort of stepped back a little moment when he did that. Funny enough, he doesn't really remember most of this because as he moved on, so sort of eventually birthday parties weren't so scary and homework wasn't so scary and school wasn't so scary. And as he moved on, he forgot what he used to be frightened of, and new things still worry him a little bit, and he likes to prepare a lot. So there's little parts of his personality that you can see that this sort of bits of this remain, but he's now able to feel the worry and get on with things. But I will say sometimes a little bit more cautiously than the next person. So he's probably a little bit more cautious to us. It's important to say also that a little bit of worry and anxiety is important, because without that, we may not do anything at all. So a little bit of worry sort of helps us prepare for an exam. It helped me prepare for this, because if I don't prepare at all, then what am I going to do when I get here? And so that little bit of worry about how this might be received, how, you know, will you listen? Will you think things are funny that I think are funny? Will you be sad when I'm sad? All those things worry me about giving a talk. And if I don't prepare, and if I don't have that little bit of worry, then I'm not forced to prepare. So little bits of worry, we should be a little bit familiar with that. And it may be also a driver. So that little bit of adrenaline that it brings in is also the driver to help us to do things. Today, we're going to talk mostly about ordinary anxiety and worry. And if there's an issue that doesn't seem to resolve through your sort of the parenting techniques and you slowing down and giving reassurance, then do talk to your local family centre or do talk to a GP about it, because it's really important to sort of figure out what's available. But sometimes as a parent, and I thought speak as a parent myself with lots of knowledge about parenting, but actually sometimes I also need to ask help, because with our own children, we sometimes don't see the wood for the trees, because our own expectations, as I said initially, and the expectations of our child kind of mismatch at a certain time. And so we have to work on that. So we'll go into what is worry, anxiety, and fear. So I suppose, firstly, fear is a threat to something that's happening now. So a deadline, a date, something that has to happen immediately. So it has a certain kind of immediacy. Anxiety is future-focused fear. So it's the what if this happens? What if something else happens? It can be a kind of physical response. So we sort of feel a dry mouth. We have a sort of the psychological self-talk, you know, I won't be able to manage, this will go badly, nobody will be there when I get there. If something goes wrong, nobody will look after me. So all of those things that might be going on. And it sometimes can be a behavioral response. So we often see in children the behavior of maybe stepping back and opting out of things. So quite often what I find in children, both my own and children we work with, is that how the anxiety and worry have come to the fore is that they've really just stopped. They just stop and they sort of protect themselves by not putting themselves in the anxious position. And so changing that behavior without dealing with all these sort of other things that are going on, the fears and the worries and the feelings that go behind it, sometimes we're plowing into the behavior, well, you must do this and you must do, without firstly listening and paying attention to the first layers of how they got there. Worry and anxiety can affect your whole being. So it's a sort of an overall feeling. So it's that feeling that goes from your stomach, your legs don't work, your mouth is dry. There's a sort of this whole sort of holistic kind of feeling. It can go from a little twinging uneasiness, so a little feeling like, yeah, I'm not sure this is going to be okay, let's hope, to full-blown terror, I can't do it, this is a step too far. And lots of children respond by becoming clingy and quiet, or sometimes upset and angry. So we have different types of responses. And I mean, there are only two. You may sort of, as you're thinking about your own children, you think of how they manage, what do they do? I have another twin, and he sort of, you see fear in him, you see anxiety. So, but he's got this sort of big, deep breath that he takes. So you know that's what he's feeling. And he doesn't want to think about the feelings of it. He doesn't want cuddles. He wants to plow forward and do it. So that's quite a different response to anxiety. So he feels the worry the same as his brother, but it doesn't stop him in his tracks. In fact, it becomes a driver for him because he doesn't like it to get in his way. So here we think about what are the causes. And I think it's really important to think about what are the causes of anxiety. And I suppose to start with, actually, while I've given you can see on this slide, there's a couple of different causes that I've put down, but actually there's no one cause that if we took it away would remove the problem. So that's where if we take away school, or we take away the separation, or we take away something, what is going to happen the next time an anxious moment or a worrying thing comes along? So actually, we can't just take away the thing that causes the anxiety. We can't remove it. There's certain things that definitely are triggers for children, and they're triggers into sort of anxiety. There's things like social media. We have school. There's a lot of pressure in school. There's a lot of demands. There's a lot of performance. So, you know, do I get my spellings right? Do I get my maths right? Will the right person sit next to me? Will someone talk to me? Will they not talk to me? Will somebody be mean to me? Will I be mean to someone else? All of those things are there as real. And I suppose one of the things to think about with children is that these worries are very real. Do you know, they're not a sort of, they're not things we can brush away. They feel very real. They feel as they're as worrying as when we feel, will we pay the mortgage? They're as worrying as we feel when we're sort of helping somebody who's you know, bereaved, or we're having a bereavement ourselves. It's the same feeling for them, even though the issues may seem to us surmountable and small. So allowing the issue to be as big as it is for the child is really important, to actually hear exactly how big is this. One of the things about things like bereavement and separation, for the child, there may be that feeling that actually the worst thing, you know, that you could imagine has actually happened. So then when we say, look, you know, what you're worrying about won't happen, well, actually, they've already had a kind of a brain feeling that actually anything can happen. So anything is possible. So the child's brain has reacted. So it reacts to, in essence, what is a big issue, like a separation or a bereavement, but it's forgotten to switch off. So then when it comes across small bits of fear and small bits of worry, it goes into overdrive. And that's really sort of where that sort of anxiety that we can't quite name why. So children, quite often, we ask, like, well, why is that worrying you? And they're like, I don't know. They don't have an answer. And I know as a parent, even as a parent who knew this, I found that really frustrating. I found it really frustrating to think, well, you must know why. Surely you know why. And I think sometimes our frustration and our demand for the answer sometimes doesn't give us the answer how to fix it. Because even if we know why and we took it away, how would this child actually feel less anxious? Would they feel less anxious in the next moment? And I'm not sure about that. We can have a debate as well about, is it nature or nurture? And I suppose when you're the parent of twins, you kind of get into your head that actually you do see that people have a different response to things. And that means they need a different response from us as parents. So everything is not the same. So treating people equally means treating them differently. So with my two boys, if I give a lot of reassurance to Colin, he feels uncomfortable with it. He doesn't need it. He's sort of like, what are you doing, Mom? I'm cool. I know what I'm doing. This is fine. Whereas my other boy, Rory, you need to sit with him. You need to spend time with him to help him think about what's happening and predict and, you know, and plan for eventualities and things like that, because that's what helps him. So if they're both preparing for something, actually treating them equally means getting them there. So how do I get both these boys to their football training? Well, one of them means spending a bit of time on it, and the other one means, you know, sticking him in the car and driving him there. So that's quite different as well. COVID has been a huge thing for children, and they hear lots and lots of things. They hear things about, you know, school. You know, they're going back to school. They can hear on the radio. They hear us chatting. They hear our worries about it. They see things on the news. They hear it from their friends, and they become worried about it. So we've seen quite a lot more children worried about what COVID means. Now, COVID, it seems to be a very, very sort of scary thing. We know this. It's potentially going to kill somebody that we know and maybe already has. It's certainly going to make us ill. And I think all of those things are sitting there for children. So we're seeing a lot more sort of generalized anxiety because of that. And we can't make it go away. And there's still demands on us to do. So we might feel fearful, but we still need to go out to the supermarket and get food. The child may feel fearful, but still has to go to school. And how we address that, how do we deal with those fears? They're fears that we can talk about because they're clear, you know, and there's a clear kind of pathway and a clear pathway to managing it. And we'll think about that in a few minutes. Things like social media, there's a huge impact on children from social media. There used to be a time when most of our children's conversations, and certainly for myself growing up and maybe for many of you, that, you know, your parents were kind of privy to a lot of conversations. A lot of things happened in front of each other, but behind a screen, anything can be happening. So children can be very lonely and alone with the information that they hear. They may not sure if they should have heard the information or seen the information, and maybe they've looked up things they shouldn't look up. Maybe there's people talking to them that shouldn't be talking to them. Even their peers saying negative things can be something that's really hard to process if you're doing that on your own. in my house, I'd imagine that I made it quite difficult for children, for my guys to come back to me, because, you know, I would have had quite a negative viewpoint of them being on that chat in it anyway. So it makes it much more tricky. So we need to find a way of keeping a really open communication, a really open way of hearing what our children are doing online, what they're seeing online and things like that, so that we can address issues as they arise, so that they don't grow into something that becomes this sort of mammoth kind of brain freeze that stops us doing. And children also worry about things like friendships, and online as well, you know, who's your friend and who isn't your friend becomes a huge issue. I certainly worked with teenagers at one stage some who were on Facebook, some who weren't, and how many people had made, you know, where their friends actually mattered quite a lot, and even sort of trying to have talks about, well, really, are they your friends and are they not? And trying to use the logic of it didn't seem to work. So more you have to go into the feelings of, well, what's happening for you, and is this actually useful or good for you? So what do we want? What outcome are we looking for? I suppose the bottom line is that we're hoping that somebody can sort of feel the fear and do it anyway. I think this graphic of Mowgli describes it all. I'm not sure we'd want to put our children into quite this situation, but in essence, when faced with danger, that they can manage it, that they can work it out, that we can, and that we are clear on what the goal is. What's the most important thing to happen here? What's the most important change? And we can focus on that. So what exactly do we want? You know, and is it realistic? So, you know, I want my child to attend school every day, but is it realistic that they're happy about that every day? But, you know, that's about sort of balancing our expectations and managing our expectations. We also sort of have to work with our child to what they want, because sometimes we're overriding what they want or overriding that discussion by moving towards behavior very quickly. So again, if we're saying, right, you must go to school, you must, without hearing why. So lots of times children actually want the same thing, but oftentimes we've not helped them to realize that and talk about that goal with us. So it's much more useful to talk about what they want. So what's the best day they can have? What would be the best outcome here? That they can go in and be happy and be relaxed. And you know, and that might be about all sorts of things that they face. You know, for my boy, it was facing football training. School wasn't an issue. And what's the fear? What's the worry here? What are we really worried about? But this part about what outcome are we looking for? And the other thing that's really important here is that we prioritize. So if we've got a child who's anxious about lots and lots of things, that we take out some of the demands that are less important and we focus on those that are. So for example, if I had a child who wasn't going to school and wasn't going to training and wouldn't do was balking at their piano exams, well, I would basically take out the other pressures and I would focus on the school, because school is kind of the legal place. We need to go, we need to attend, and that's a really important socialization for him as well. So it's about sort of working out what are your priorities with your child so that you're only focusing on managing small steps, one step at a time. The other thing that gets a little in our way and impacts us is that part about to think about taking our own temperature. So where are we at when we think about this child's anxiety? So are we hot and bothered? Are we stressed by the fact that our child isn't managing this very well? Are we warm and worried? Are we kind of like, oh, I'm quite worried, you know, staying with the worry and the anxiousness ourselves, but we're not getting too stressed about it? Or are we cool and collected and manage quite well? Now, I don't know. I would imagine that while I was parenting young children, that I moved somewhat between these. But what is absolutely sure for me is that if we're hot and bothered and we're feeling very stressed about this moment, this outcome, the here and now, we are unlikely to be useful to our child in terms of managing the anxiety. So slowing down yourself, thinking about what you want to achieve here, thinking about what's possible to achieve today, not focusing on the sort of what's going to happen in the future. We need to remember that children pick up our cues. So if we're really stressed, maybe they're imagining that we think they're right about being anxious. Maybe they're feeling the stress alongside us, and we need to think about that. We need to think about things that, annoy us or make us anxious. So what worries us? So things like, you know, can you imagine feeling so anxious that you couldn't do something? And I certainly think at one stage my partner, as a lovely present, and I had always talked about singing. I always wanted to sing, and you know, would sing in the house, and always regretted that I didn't do singing lessons when I was young. And for one Christmas, I got a set of 10 singing lessons. And I have to say that it created such a high level of anxiety in me, and stress and worry. And as you can see, I'm not too worried about talking in public, but singing suddenly seemed, with one person who was going to give me lessons, was actually sort of, for me, insurmountable. It was just a huge anxiety for me, the idea that I would go and meet somebody and sing out loud and potentially be criticized for that. So really challenging. And it really made me feel like just hiding under the duvet. I wanted to run away from that. And remember, for children, so that was very new for me. That was a very new, it would have been a very new experience. I couldn't imagine myself in that place. And remember, for children, everything is new. So every situation we put them into is a new situation. So returning to school post-COVID, or in the midst of COVID, but post the summer holidays when they'd had this break, would have been really new. And are we also worried about what's going to happen here? So, you know, when we're dropping somebody off to a birthday party, are we thinking, are we happy with this house? Does this look a bit crazy? Does this look like mayhem? Does this look like the way I run things? And if we've got a little bit of worry, they also may pick that up. So what are we worried about ourselves? So when they're worried about things like COVID, are we also really worried about COVID? And are we sort of starting the day by saying, now make sure and sanitize, and if you haven't done this, and no. So when we think about the fears and worry about our fears and worries and anxiety of our child, what is it that we feel? And what feelings are we comfortable with? So what feelings that our child has are we comfortable with? And I certainly know for me that I'm very comfortable with verbals. You know, when somebody says, oh, I'm really worried about, that sort of is okay for me. When I see the acting out of worry, I'm less, you know, as a parent, I found that sort of much more stressful and much more worrying. And I think that it's something that we really have to do, that sort of sense of take our own temperature. Firstly, can we manage ourselves? Can we manage to stay cool? Because what we do know is our own frustration is unlikely to get this child over the next step. So actually really thinking, what's my strategy? So what am I going to do tomorrow to make this happen? This thing that's going to make my child anxious. And how will I hear them? How will I listen to them? So what can we do? So there's things that we know that work. So some of the things that work are things like relaxation, play, breathing techniques and routines. And when we think about all of these, so what we do with routines is we create predictability. So this is about kind of creating a very safe and nurturing environment that it makes it feel safe. So we create something very safe for children when we create the routines. And this means that even if they're not going to do something, that they take all the steps towards getting there. So, you know, and I talk about when somebody's not attending school, we usually try to get them up at the same time in the morning. We don't have screen time. We run the house the same as if they had gone, and we work that out. The same way when getting ready for a birthday party, instead of focusing on you'll be okay at the party, we say, here, how about you just get ready for it, and we think about the next step. So we're only taking one step at a time. And this predictability and routine, so sleeping, going to bed at the right times, having meals, having exercise, all of those, and that being a predictable routine actually creates this sort of safe base or safe haven that the child can then kind of move out from. When we return to that treadmill, there's a kind of comfort in knowing what's going to happen next when we've just had to take a foray into the what's unknown. We think about things like relaxing, and we think, oh, well, they relax all the time, children. But actually, do we relax alongside them? So can we help a child to relax by being relaxed? So really relax. What about that? No plans, no agenda. And just think about how busy your home is with all the comings and goings. Do you get time to actually just chill on a couch, no devices, with your child, to actually really give time and attention and actually have a genuine chill out? Or is that something that you used to have and find it hard to achieve now just because of busyness and life gets in the way? There are things like you can look up online, like breathing skills, mindfulness, and you can do those with your children. And there's some really, really nice tools out there, really nice things that you can do alongside. And actually giving a child a hook, so something when this feeling comes to you, that you can actually take a breathing, take some time to breathe, actually is really important and can be something that they can use. So lots of children, there's lots of programs where children have something they can use. So they start to recognize the feeling that comes when they're anxious, and they think about what they can do in that moment. And that is often things like breathing skills really work well for that. And the other part is exercise. And what I know is at the moment with this terrible weather that we're having, it's very hard to sort of fit in exercise. But for children, they really need that. And actually for adults, we need it too. But this is about creating endorphins. It's not just that exercise is good for you physically, but it actually creates kind of happy hormones in your head. So basically it sort of changes your mind. And there's a big thing with anxiety about, like, if we think about what's our main outcome here, it's I'd really like to change this child's mind. That's the main thing to do. So things like exercise, breathing, relaxation, and this predictability really help to do that. We need to think about things like not fixing the feeling. So supposing we were to accept that anxiety is going to be there, it's part and parcel. So saying, you don't need to feel worried about this doesn't sometimes help. Sometimes we need to say, okay, so you're worried. That's okay. And the child can feel heard then. They say, oh yeah, okay, so you recognize I'm worried. Now, it's okay to feel worried and still do something. And how about letting them know that it's really normal to feel worried? Some of the stuff, if you've got younger children, there's some really good storybooks. I'll show you a couple of them at the end that are really good tool to sort of explain that everybody feels worried and that there's worry that sits over people and concerns. If we borrow from solution-focused therapy, we can think of things like helping your child to imagine a great day, a day when everything worked. So how would they get up in the morning? What would it look like? You know, how would they feel when they were getting ready for school if it was a great day, a perfect day? How would it feel when they were getting ready to do? How would it feel when they, you know, met that person that worries them a little bit or scares them? What would they do? And how do they feel safe? How would they feel safe within that? And actually sort of spending time to talk through that with them. Take small achievable steps. I think that's a really big thing as well with anxiety, is that if we sort of only look at the end goal, it's really difficult for a child to picture themselves getting there. Pick these small, tiny, achievable things. So what am I asking you to do tomorrow morning? And that can be sometimes things like just taking a one step, another, so that we're starting to get ready. And you see it with children, and I'll tell you a story in a little while about a little girl going to preschool who was really, really challenged by it. And what worked for her is these tiny, small steps that could be managed. And also recognizing maybe when had her brain changed to sort of think that this might be anxious, and actually starting to tell her the stories of when that might have occurred. So when my son felt very anxious, I did talk to him a lot about when he was in hospital. So he had a long stay in hospital as a little person, and a lot of chat with him about how as a little person he wouldn't have really understood where his mom was and his dad was, and he would have missed us at times and not understood time either, and not understood were we coming back or when we were coming back, because he was too small. And he was too small to understand all of that. And that at that stage, his brain had said, listen, if you go away from your mom and dad, it might be, you might be in danger. So he sort of hung on to us then and found it very difficult to leave and to go and do things. But by telling him that story as part of his preparing, as well as breathing exercises, as well as this routine, and as well as setting the expectations out, he starts to understand, oh, that's why my brain goes into overdrive. And sometimes understanding ourselves is actually part of the key to changing, you know, and changing our minds. The other things we have to think about are really clear. So some things like self-talk, that's that negative self-talk. I can't do, I don't want to, I'm not sure, I'm going to be rubbish at this. That kind of self-talk that comes along with worry and anxiety. We also have things like avoidance, so just not doing it. And as I say, we work a lot with children who just refuse, you know, so they just say, no, I'm not doing. And we have this mistaken belief. So do they fully understand? So COVID, for example, we need to check out, what do they think? Wait, hear it out. Try and hear it without trying to fix it. So actually, what do you think COVID can do? Well, how do you think you're going to be affected by it? What do you think might happen? And as checking out, are those mistaken beliefs or are they true? And so what's going to happen? So, you know, if you think about it, if I'm feeling anxious about giving this talk today, I might say, well, you know, I'm so worried about it. But actually, if I think about it, what do I think could happen? So if I do a bad talk, what's going to happen? Am I going to lose my job? Probably not. Am I going to, does that mean I'm rubbish at everything else I do? Probably not. So it's about unpicking some of that mistaken belief. So what sits underneath the feeling that we might not be able to do something? Withheld feelings also. So for children, feelings that they haven't shared get in their way. So finding a way to help somebody to name their feelings, or naming their feelings for them. When somebody doesn't really know how they feel, we need to be the adult and the grown-up and sort of actually stop ourselves for a second, think about it. What do you need? What are you feeling? And actually maybe even just saying it. Okay, so you're really worried about this. All right, I'm there. I'm with you. I hear that. And the other thing about feelings is we need to get in the practice of naming the feelings when it comes to other things that aren't about the anxiety, because sometimes we can get it, the thing that makes us anxious becomes really, really big, you know, so it sort of starts to expands and takes up all of this space. That's very challenging, because then our whole world starts to focus around this doing or not doing this one thing that makes us anxious. The things with, I'm leaping around a little bit here, but just in terms of COVID. So the things that we might think about are, don't say, you know, COVID doesn't kill anyone, because, you know, they know and they've heard that it does. But do say, schools are pretty safe places though, and they do a lot of sanitizing. And you can say, children are usually safe even if they get it. But remember, when you're doing all that, take your own temperature. What are you feeling? When we talk about self-talk, the negative self-talk, one of the things you're really trying to do is turn it around. So replacing it with something more supportive. So when somebody says, I'm not going to football because I'm rubbish at it, what makes you think that? What makes you think you're rubbish? Whoa, okay, that's interesting. So the coach said this to you one day. I wonder what they meant. And I wonder what you could do instead. And supposing you thought, hey, I enjoy football. And you start to work out, is there some words that this person can use about themselves that would change that mindset and change it from that negative self-talk? But firstly, we have to hear it, and then we have to help turn around the phrase. So what exact phrase does your child use when they're doing this negative self-talk? I can't, I won't, I'm afraid. And how can we turn it around to something positive? When we look at avoidance, we then have this issue, which is, as long as the thing is avoided, the child imagines that they can't handle it. And small steps towards moving away from avoidance, and this is where the sort of cliched of, you know, getting back up on the horse after you've been knocked off, it really matters. So small steps are important, but moving towards an end goal, making sure that your goal is aligned with your child. So what are you hoping for? What are they hoping for? And so that you can take those small steps together. And you plan the steps out, and don't leap forward, because it can be tempting when you've managed to get someone to take the first step that you then leap into step number 5 where everything is achieved, and then we kind of have to go back again and roll back. But remember, you can always start again. And I think that's really important. So other things that we can use, and I know I'm coming probably close to time, the other things we can use is things like books and stories. And I'll just tell you, as I'm coming to close, just a little story about a niece of mine. And she started in preschool last year, and she was very excited about it, and she had very little contact with anybody. or with other children her age, peers, for quite a while because we'd had COVID. And so we kind of came to September, and she'd been thinking about these friends that she was going to have, and she was thinking about all the different things she was going to do with her friends. And she was very excited about going, and one would think very, very prepared. And when she went in, she absolutely balked. She couldn't do it. She cried and cried. And we're talking about somebody who was 3.5. So she was kind of a good age as well, you would think, to go. So she cried. She found it very difficult. There was a challenge between mom and dad as well, because mom was kind of, look, she's not ready. I need to take her out, and very much responding to the feeling that my little Elaine, my little niece, had. So she very much sort of felt, oh, she's not ready. And her dad was like, yeah, get her in. She'd just be grand once she's in. So there was this kind of mismatch between the way that they viewed it. It seemed like she was more scared of leaving them than she was of scared to go to school. So when unpicking it a little bit with her, she just didn't like leaving mom and dad, and she found that really tricky. Now, why was this confident little girl struggling to leave mom and dad? So one of the things that happened was we started to think about back to the beginning. So when might this have happened? When would she have would she have even decided that that was a problem? So what we thought about was she had a little sister who was in hospital the previous Christmas. So she was in hospital for about 10 days. So she was just born. So her mom left her to go and have the baby. And then about 3 days after they came home from the hospital, mom and baby and dad all had to go, a big emergency, to Dublin, and they were in hospital for about 10 days. And Elaine, who had never stayed with anybody, was suddenly with her uncle, and then she was with me. But she was very, very sad at that time, and she was very, very worried, and she hated not having her parents. And she would say, you know, I love my parents. I love my mom and dad. And I would say, they love you too. And she'd say, do they? Do they? And that was what was going on in her head. And I think that when she came going to school, actually, she wasn't thinking about the hospital, but she became scared because actually her brain remembered that, and her body remembered being left by them. And so she had gone from this idyllic world with mom and dad and lots of attention to sort of having these people that know her, that get her, gone. And that's what her brain remembered, her body. So her body said, and her brain said, I can't do this. I can't leave my parents. And one of the things we did was we started to tell her about time in the hospital. Oh, you were very sad, and it was hard for you to leave your mom and dad. And now in this situation, it's okay, because mom and dad are going to be there, and they're going to come and collect you, and then we're going to do. So we started to address it, that we think this is why you get worried about this. She's only 3.5. She understood it though. And we also picked out some books. And what was funny was she did not want to have a book brought home. So we ended up sitting on the floor of Eason's reading the I'm Worried book, the one that's there in the middle. And it tells a story about somebody who has lots of worries and this cloud, but actually that lots of other people have them too. And that the more you do, that worry goes from really big to smaller, smaller, smaller as you start to do something. And so the worrying time actually ends, and it sort of turns out not to be the end of the world that we thought it was. And so there's some of the techniques. I mean, there's not an exhaustive list. And I'd say to you that it's really important, as I say, if you're feeling stuck, to go and get help, and actually sort of having someone else talk out with you what your child's actual worry is can be a really good way to work it out, and to sort of think about where you stand yourself. Like, how do you feel about this? And how anxious it's making you, and how much those two things are feeding each other. And that's part of being a parent, is because you're in that picture with somebody, aren't you? So that's me. And what we'll do is, I think Jackie is going to come back on screen now, and we might do some questions. So the other part is when you get there, enjoy the wins. That's not always it's not always easy to do, but enjoy the small things.
Thank you very much, Melinda. That's a great help, great techniques and contribution that you have made. I have a few questions. I'm also, some questions have been asked by parents. You know, first one there was about sensitivity of a young child who's 9 and has sensory issues, and a lot of these things have escalated since that child's gone back to school, returning to school, and her own thing that she's doing is picking at her own skin, and the mom is, or the parent here, mom, yes, is afraid in case this causes serious infection. Have you any tips on how not to, I guess, is what the mom is asking?
Yeah, I think that can be, you know, sometimes the picking and things like that, and you know, picking at you know, pulling at hair and on small levels, biting nails, things like that, are all sort of signs of worry that sort of sits underneath. So number one, you're looking at what's worrying her, what are the worrying things that are there. You're really trying to hear if there's things in school that are kind of, you know, worrying her and upsetting her or concerning her even, you know, so there may be sort of small things like that. The other thing is with sensory things is that sometimes you have to give lots of kind of sensory input, so that you're not, so sometimes it's not just a talking about it, but it's things like trying to fulfill, is there something that actually by sort of touching her arms, is there something she gets out of that? The wood, giving them a really good rub in the morning, squeezing the arms, things like that. So actually sort of adding sensory input to the talking as well, so that you're starting to address both the worry but also the sensory kind of part there.
Great, and that's two senses, you know, that not only is she hearing the mom talking, she's also feeling the mom talking to her.
Exactly.
Great. And another mom is concerned about her 10-year-old is now waking every night and is worried, and he's afraid, so somebody will come into the house. Have you anything?
Okay, and that's a really sort of natural worry for children. I think a lot of children worry. I mean, lots of you will remember, you know, this kind of thing of it's different when we're the parent, but you know, you probably remember it from being a child, where you sort of say, well, my dad is bigger, and no, my dad is bigger, and you know, this sort of like who's got the best, and the, you know, and so that's sort of part of children, of sort of saying, listen, and that's about safety. So we think that that's about boasting, really, because you see a parent when they've got a, you know, and you see a child when, and their dad is 5'3", and they're still the biggest, strongest dad in the whole world. And that's about perception and perception of safety. So one of the things, I suppose, for starting, it is normal to have sometimes when we feel scared, and it's normal for children to have a patch of time when they have wakefulness and some sort of fears at night. And the biggest thing that you're doing is, I suppose, number one, I remember reading a thing once, and it was like, don't look for monsters under the bed. So first off, you're reassuring. So if the person is sort of, what are they scared of? Are they scared that someone is going to come in? Are they scared of, you know, so you find lots of children are scared of things like kidnappers. They're scared of robbers. They're scared of, you know, so this sort of kind of quite big fantasy, kind of almost monster-like figures that will come and do something to us. And so you just reassure that we're safe, and that actually mom is here, or dad is here, or both of us are here to keep you safe. And we can do that. We can manage actually keeping you safe, and you're going to be okay. So lots and lots of reassurance, and trying to keep things the same. So trying to do as much of kind of those times it can be very tempting, for example, to bring a child into your own bed if they've been sleeping alone. And that we have to be sure that we're not feeding into that there's something to worry about, therefore you should be in with me, more so that we settle somebody back. And don't be afraid that if you've had a child who's maybe been settled for years, that you now find yourself back at kind of when they were 3, and you're back returning them to their bed and settling them back again. Children do have these ups and downs, and not having high expectations, but actually recognizing their need for reassurance and giving them that piece of reassurance that they need lets them let it go again. You can be assured that your sort of 14-year-old isn't going to be knocking into you saying, come here, I've had a bad dream. And so this time passes, but it's really about reassuring. And, you know, as I say, as a parent myself, I found it very tempting sometimes to just say, listen, would you cop on and just go back to bed? You'd be grand, you know, but actually just giving a little time and attention to it without saying that the fear is real. So without saying there are, so as I say, this is the part, and I do remember it being kind of a bit of a wake up for me. It was the, you know, I'm scared there's a monster under my bed. I'm scared there's a monster in the closet. And we sort of going, oh, let me check. But actually when we say, let me check, we're actually giving credence to the fear. So
Okay.
So actually saying, it's okay. I have checked this out. I have always kept you safe, and I'm going to keep you safe now. Relax, go back to sleep. And that's what you're doing. You're saying, it's okay. I'm here, and I have always been here.
It's resetting the program for the kid, basically,
Exactly.
and keeping them at bay with their fears. So then, there's another. I have two more. One woman has, or sorry, a parent. Sorry, I shouldn't be reflecting on that as women. That says that there's two kids at home, 6 and 9, and they worry about greater outside of the house things, about homelessness, how people will get through being homeless and this COVID situation during lockdown, and where are the homeless during lockdown and how are they protected, and also worrying about the environment and the big issues that adults don't even have a solution for.
Yes. And again, I think a huge amount of that is about kind of reassurance. It's about sort of giving real answers as well, because actually they are worrying things, and sort of being able to sort of say, yeah, actually it's amazing that you are thinking about sort of these big things. And actually sometimes for children as well, doing things, sort of doing something a little bit active, so doing something for a charity. So if they're worried about homelessness, it's like looking at things like the Simon community. Do you want to go and buy a coat with your child to say, listen, somebody will be wearing a coat that you've bought? So this is about sort of recognizing that sort of sense of power within ourselves to do something. And we know realistically that what we can do as individuals might be limited, but actually instilling that part in your children that that there's an action. But we have to acknowledge that also it is a terrible thing for a child to be worried about. And once they've met it, and we have to help them to sort of understand it and unpick it. And I think just being very realistic about it and saying, yeah, there are people who have ended up homeless that through no fault of their own, and there's different things that go on in families and different things that sort of make those things happen. And what about it really worries you? And is it about their safety? Is it about that this could happen to anyone, or is it a worry that an external thing? But I think sort of embracing the discussion and also really validating that this is somebody who's thinking very much bigger than themselves. And something, isn't that a beautiful thing as well? Even
embracing the social conscience. And I was thinking as well, like the parents, if it helps at all, could become very aware of their own recycling routine in their household, and having 3 bins and going through it with the kids. So this is the plastics, this is the cardboard. And by, instead of sitting with worry, create an action, that we can act as a family very, very, aware of how we recycle now, because we're taking the worry and creating, I think, an action with them, and they might feel relieved, or that they've done something. All of us, we can only do our own bit in our own house. We can't take on the David Attenborough scale of things, and that's what David Attenborough's job is. To be that vocal point of it for us.
And even he doesn't succeed that well.
No,
so I think there's something about sort of being realistic about what you can do, and saying, yeah, that I think that realistically they are really worrying things, and I think that's about sort of the things that are really worrying, but actually will they impact how your child lives their life from day to day? And I suppose that's the part that you're trying to mitigate. I had a little boy who also was worried about big things like that. Not funny, the boy I was talking about today, another one of my boys, had a lot of worry about those much broader issues. One worried close to home and one worried about the wider. Yeah.
And media can feed into it. If they're seeing a lot of news, and homelessness, last year was so much more topical than COVID-19. It was the biggest topic at the time.
So all of the adverts, this time of year is horrific. I mean, you can see my Barnardos hoarding behind me. A lot of our advertising is really hammering home that that there are people in difficulty. And I think that for children is very challenging, because it means that we need to talk to them about it. Yeah.
And talking about what they see definitely is worth it. Also, we have a parent who is concerned that their 6-year-old goes through phases, and now a bit of an Eeyore, she says, like you said earlier, and goes through phases where the bedwetting, and is very unsettled in school, then having trouble with classmates. And she wants to know, is there any tips for that?
Again, a lot of that is sort of what we talked about today, but what I say is to slow down. So one of the things is not worrying about things like the bed wetting, the waking during the night, all of those things, because what you're trying to do there is you're trying to fix the symptoms. So this is about sort of trying to sort of treat something that's very much on the outside, whereas what you really need to do is change the diet. So that's the most important thing, is that you sort of looking at what sits underneath. So what's worrying her about school and about those things, and almost with the bedwetting is that you just deal with that almost as a separate entity. So that's about just reassuring, we can change your bed, that's not a big deal, this is all doable. So you make things manageable in terms of how the symptoms are managed, which is the bedwetting, the waking at night, things like that. But what you're trying to do is unpick what lies underneath. And so you're talking about the worry in school, the sort of how she might manage her peers, who are her friends, and you're talking through that with her, and trying not to bring your own anxiety to the table is really important as well, because it's so easy to just start to get really worried when you see these symptoms in your children. So being really calm about those things is a good way of saying, hey, no matter what comes, I'm going to manage it, including your wet bed. And they're kind of the ways, by staying really calm within that is part of how you manage.
Thank you, Melinda. And thank you everybody for all your chats. Sorry I can't get through them all, because last week I found myself doing that and I couldn't juggle the three. The Q&As, the chats have been fantastic. Everyone's thanking us for a supportive speech and talking and organising this webinar. Another parent there also saying that staying attuned to the kids and giving them the attention that they ask for makes them confident and have time for me to talk with something that is bothering them. I feel this is very important, as is the feeling of connectedness and the great assurance of children can prevent them from sorry, I'm actually losing. Yeah, so people are helping along there on the chat lines, which is very beneficial too. I hope I've gotten around to everybody's question. And Melinda, I have shared it then with you. One person wants me to email. Also, anything that has come up here for people and we haven't been able to cover it, the numbers are there on the screen. There's Barnardo's, there's ISPCC, there's the Family Resource Centre in Croom, there's myself in Ballyhara and Camalloch, and there's Martha in Hospital Family Resource Centre, and Alice from Tusla. But the Family Resource Centres in particular, if anything comes up that you haven't feel is covered, by all means contact your family support worker in your local Family Resource Centre, and we'll do what we can to get services in contact with you. If there's any extra help at all, or any people who can assist with parenting, we're here to link in with you. Melinda, thank you so much for your contribution this morning. It's been fantastic, and thank you everybody, and hope to see you next week. And so long, have a good week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.